Cannibalism in humans has always been one of the most truly disturbing and interesting things I've come to learn about when it comes to morbid cases. From Jeffrey Dahmer to Armin Muse, cannibals always seem to be particularly cold and lack a lot of empathy. And in fact, some even relish in what they have done. And I don't think anyone has taken it as far as Issei Sagawa, otherwise known as the Kobe Cannibal. Issei Sagawa was born into quite a rich family on April 26, 1947. He was prematurely born and developed enteritis. His father was a businessman and previously served as the president for a water company. His grandfather was the editor for a newspaper magazine. And growing up, Sagawa would have poor health. That mixed in with his introverted personality made it hard for him to get friends, leading him to find solitude in something else: literature. Throughout his life, he had cannibalistic thoughts and had participated in some pretty disgusting acts. Sagawa's first time experiencing cannibalistic thoughts came to him when he was just in the first grade, at 6 years old. After seeing another male's thigh, he thought to himself that it looked delicious. And in an interview, Sagawa even admits to taking part in bestiality with his dog when he was younger, and that cannibalistic urges started growing as well. And those thoughts would only grow even more, to a point that he would try to take action for the first time. When he was 24 years old, he was attending Waco University. After class, he followed a female home, only to later break into her apartment when she was sleeping. The reason? He was trying to attempt to slice off small parts of her buttocks for himself to consume without her waking up. But, just like you would assume, it did not go his way. She woke up and wrestled him to the ground, and then she called authorities. He never told the authorities his true motivations for breaking into the woman's house, so they charged him with attempted rape. His father would then later settle with the victim, leading to the son's charges getting dropped. But that wouldn't be the last time he would get away with something, because just a couple years later, one of the most horrific things he could possibly do happens. Just a couple years later, when he was 28, he would move to France to get a PhD in literature at the Sorbonne, located in Paris. Sagawa would bring home prostitutes with his money just about every night, and every night he would try to kill them by shooting them in the head. But he can never actually bring himself to pull the trigger, except for this time. Renee was a classmate in Sagawa's class, and he had a thing for her, so he decided to invite her over under the premise of her tutoring him. He would pay for her time, and one day he invited her over for some food, and they drank alcohol. And then they began their session. She was under the premise that she was supposed to read a German poem aloud and record herself, and while she was reading, he would grab his rifle that he had hid earlier, aimed it at her head, and while she had no idea what was going on, reading the poem, he actually pulled the trigger. She instantly slumped over, and that's when he realized what he had done to her. There was no turning back. He thought to himself that he was no longer human, but that initial feeling he had didn't last for long, as he was overcome with feelings that he always had to conceal, and he was about to do what he always wanted to do. He would begin to take off her clothes. He pondered on what part of her body to eat first. He then decided on her buttocks. He took a bite out of it. He then did indecent actions to her corpse, and the rest of the stuff he does I cannot even describe, as it is too gruesome for YouTube. And After everything, he would chop up her body into chunks, eating most of it raw and storing a lot of it in the fridge. He placed her remains into 2 suitcases and planned to dump her remains in a lake. But the suitcases were too heavy, and blood started leaking everywhere when he was in the midst of doing it in the public. That's when people nearby noticed, and that's when he knew it was game over. He ran back home as fast as he could for the last time, devouring as much as her body as he could, knowing he could never get a second chance again. He ate large amounts of her body before the authorities showed up, and he would soon be placed under arrest and charged for his crimes. Soon after being placed under arrest, he was found to not be mentally well enough to stand trial, being placed into a mental asylum. That was until his dad was able to bring him back to Japan, and he was able to bring him back to a mental hospital in Japan, where his father would employ a therapist to try to cure his son. About a year later, 15 months to be exact, he was able to check out of that hospital, and since then has been free. France ended up dropping the charges because he was not fit to stand trial, and whenever that happens, the files get concealed, so Japan cannot charge him with anything as there was no evidence. And so he was able to walk free after about 3 years. And unlike forgetting about it, he boasted about it online, basically becoming an internet celebrity. He starred in adult films, did interviews, the most popular of which being the Vice interview. He continued this for years, eventually making a manga and a book about what he did. He would draw grotesque things and write about himself and how he felt about cannibalism. And this book itself is pretty hard to come by nowadays, as it's not cheap online and it wasn't published outside of Japan, which means there's no translated versions. And in 2022, Sagawa would pass away, and Renee's family would never get any of the justice they deserved. This was how a cannibalistic author got away with murder.